The vaulted hall of the House Oversight Committee spread out like an old cathedral, all high ceilings and lacquered oak that radiated a hushed authority at odds with the crackle of barely contained tension, drifting across the rows of legislators. Staffers threaded back and forth behind their bosses, passing memos, whispering updates, while a phalanx of journalists hugged the walls. Lenses trained on the hearing's focal point, Senator John Neely Kennedy of Louisiana. Kennedy lounged at the witness table in a posture of practiced ease, but a bright intelligence flickered in his eyes. The session scheduled to address a fresh anti-corruption bill might have been marked on the calendar as routine, yet everyone present sensed the charge in the air, as though the walls themselves braced for a coming thunderclap. Kennedy, famous for a genial southern drawl that masked razor-sharp instincts, had volunteered to testify in favor of the measure, an uncharacteristic move for a senator who usually skirted the House's partisan fights. Pundits had wondered why he would place himself before a panel dominated by political rivals. Whatever his motive, the answer approached on quiet heels. Representative Maxine Waters, decade-strong Democrat and formidable committee chair, settled into her seat of authority like a general on the eve of battle. Her reputation for withering interrogations preceded her. So did the warning that her tongue could slice through marble. With a rap of the gavel, Waters called the hearing to order, leaning forward in a pose that suggested interrogation rather than inquiry. The opening minutes unfolded per custom definitions clarified. Procedural minutia, dispatched yet every clipped question Waters hurled carried an undertow of challenge. Kennedy fielded them with leveled tone, his voice syrup smooth, but never shifted his gaze from hers. The back and forth remained civil, though the silence stretching between questions felt taut as piano wire. Then the wire snapped. Waters inched closer to her microphone, a hint of amusement tugging at her mouth. "With all due respect, Senator Kennedy," she said, each word coated in sugar and steel, "you're nothing more than a thug in a tailored suit, and thugs don't get to lecture this committee." Her insult cracked like a whip. Gasps ricocheted through the chamber, aides froze mid-stride, and camera crews swung lenses toward Kennedy's face, hungry for the explosion. But Kennedy didn't explode. He folded his hands, stared at Waters with cool detachment, and let 5 eternal seconds crawl by. The hush pressed on eardrums until the scratch of a reporter's pen sounded like cannon fire. Then, in a register barely above conversation, he spoke. "Ma'am," he began, slow as molasses, yet heavy as iron. "I came here to talk about rooting out government rot for folks who are sick of getting the short end of the stick. If you'd prefer to trade in name-calling, that's your right, but why dodge the real story?" He reached for a thin folder and withdrew a single page. The cameras zoomed. "This letter is from Carla Jones," he said, lifting it for all to see. "Single, mother of 3, living in your district. She pleaded with your office 6 separate times about a landlord who'd let the roof cave in. Her kids slept beneath buckets catching rainwater. You know what she heard back? Nothing." Murmurs rippled across the dais. Glances ping-ponged between lawmakers. Waters' smile evaporated, replaced by a faint tightening at the corners of her eyes. Kennedy's timbre never rose, yet every syllable landed like a mallet against a drum. "See, I reckon a thug isn't the man spotlighting a forgotten family. MAAM. A thug is whoever permits that family to be forgotten." The gallery buzzed louder, sympathetic nods from a few replicants, uneasy shifting among Democrats. Waters straightened, about to interject. "Senator, this hearing isn't your soapbox," she began, but the committee chair halted her with a palm. "The witness will finish," he ruled. Kennedy acknowledged the ruling with a small nod. "I'll keep it plain," he resumed. "Your district sits atop some of the country's toughest poverty numbers. Homes with no heat, classrooms with rotted floors. Folks need answers, not adjectives." He slipped Carla's letter back, producing a heftier report studied with pie charts. Over 5 years, millions in housing repair grants vanished into nonprofits tied to people in your political orbit. Not illegal, maybe, but ethical. A chorus of low exclamations rolled through reporters. Keyboards rattled like hail. Waters' composure frayed. "Senator, you're weaponizing anecdotes." Kennedy lifted a fingertip, polite yet immovable. "Anecdotes become evidence when they pile high enough." He launched into the tale of Marcus Tatan, unemployed father of 2, who'd waited for a job training program until learning the funds had been rerouted elsewhere. Each narrative peeled another layer from Waters' public image. The camera captured her jaw tensing, her fingers drumming in the back row. A young woman dabbed tears, recognizing her own struggles in Kennedy's litany. The senator remained unaware, but his words coursed through her like electricity. Waters tried again to wrest control. "Senator, you have no grasp of my constituents' realities." Kennedy leaned in, voice dropping to a near whisper that echoed more than any shout. "Then answer them. Congresswoman, explain Carla's roof, Marcus's hunger. Explain why grant money keeps slipping through cracks deeper than the potholes on their streets." Silence answered. One reporter hissed. "He's landed the punch." The chairman announced a recess. Pandemonium erupted. Lawmakers clustered. Aides chattered. Social feeds detonated. Kennedy stayed seated, thumbed a quiet text to staff clip the exchange, but keep focus on residents. Around the nation, clips of his calm rebuttal skyrocketed. View counts ballooned. Comment sections blasted with praise and outrage. When session resumed, Kennedy unveiled fresh documents emails linking housing dollars to a firm run by a cousin of Waters' advisor. Gasps crescendoed. Waters' responses grew brittle. Her earlier fire sputtering. Into this freeze stepped Lorraine Hayes, ex-staffer, summoned by Kennedy's quiet nod. Lorraine testified, voice trembling yet firm, that constituent voicemails languished unreturned while donors were coddled. The room's air thickened to syrup. Waters' knuckles blanched. Kennedy never gloated. He simply lined up corroborations. 3 more statements, each echoing Lorraine. Gallery members reacted in audible anguish. A man stood in solidarity with his pastor's name, invoked the chair, struggled to gavel order, as truth barged through the door and refused to leave. Outside, hashtags bloomed. In community halls across South LA, residents streamed the footage. Some cheering, some weeping, all awakening. Kennedy, collecting his binders, felt none of the triumph watchers projected onto him. He felt only the heft of stories entrusted to him, and he recognized the moment wasn't an ending but a fused. As the hearing reconvened for a final day, the chamber felt changed tension, replaced by solemn expectation. Waters, shoulders sagging, avoided Kennedy's eyes. He opened with no new accusations, only a worn notebook brimming with handwritten letters. "Blame's easy," he said. "Hope is harder, but folks deserve it." He invoked Miss Eleanor from Baton Rouge, whose wisdom that caring matters more than perfection anchored. His message, Kennedy's words shifted from indictment to invitation. He challenged leaders to treat power as stewardship, not crown. He submitted a 2,000 signature petition, requesting independent audits in act not of vengeance but of empowerment. The gallery's subdued applause felt heavier than thunder. Kennedy ended with a story of 13-year-old Aisha, uncertain anyone cared. "We do," he vowed, voice trembling. "Your voice counts." The gavel fell. Applause rose, not a roar, but a solemn pledge. Kennedy knelt to sign a boy's notebook. Whispered encouragement captured in a viral snapshot. Across LA, residents mobilized into town hall committees. Nationwide, viewers reconsidered disengagement. Waters' office stayed silent. Phones rang unanswered. Kennedy returned to his Senate office, letters awaiting. He opened one, smiled weary gratitude, and read. On the echoes of the hearing persisted, proof that truth delivered firmly, yet respectfully, can roll back indifference, and that voices, once stirred, refused to still. End of part 1. Ready to continue with part 2, whenever you say. The air in the hearing chamber had shifted from static tension to something quieter, something heavier. Gone was the fiery cross-examination, the rapid-fire exchanges, the posturing. In its place was a silence thick with realization. Senator John Kennedy no longer had to prove anything. The facts had spoken for themselves, and so had the people behind those facts. Carla, Marcus, Lorraine, and thousands more, without seats in that room, but with stories that now hung in its rafters, like invisible flags. When the final session resumed, Kennedy sat alone at the witness table, his hands folded atop a worn black notebook. His folders, the heavy binders from the day before, were gone, their contents already etched into the public record and the national psyche. Maxine Waters entered after him, noticeably subdued. Her shoulders no longer held the stiff pride they once had. Her aides walked behind her in silence, exchanging quick, uneasy glances. It was as if the entire committee had been transported to the final act of a courtroom drama, except no one cheered, and no gavel had declared victory. The chairman brought the session to order with a single tap that echoed across the room, like a closing door. Kennedy waited a moment before leaning into the mic, his voice as steady as it was the first day. "Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to finish what I started," he said. "The last couple of days have been hard. Hard for this committee, hard for Congresswoman Waters, and hardest for the folks in her district who've lived with these truths for years. But I'm not here to add more weight to those shoulders. I'm here to help lift it." He paused and gently opened the notebook in front of him. There were no graphs inside, no policy briefings or bullet point accusations, just handwritten letters. Dozens of them. "These are from people across the country," he continued. "Not just from South LA, but from Memphis, Flint, Baton Rouge, and even small towns you'll never hear about on the news. They've all written to someone, some leader, hoping to be heard, hoping someone, somewhere, still remembers what public service means." In the gallery, a woman held her breath. A row behind her, a man folded his arms across his chest, his eyes welling as Kennedy spoke. These weren't just names anymore, they were people, neighbors, parents, teachers, citizens. And suddenly, this wasn't just a hearing. It was a reckoning. "I don't believe anyone walks into Congress hoping to forget their people," Kennedy said, now turning his gaze directly to Waters. "I believe most folks start with good intentions. But somewhere along the way, power stops being a tool and starts becoming a shield. a cushion, a throne. And when that happens, when we stop listening, we stop leading. Waters didn't respond. Her hands remained clasped tightly on the desk, her expression unreadable. Kennedy wasn't attacking anymore. He was appealing not to politics, but to the conscience. I want to tell you about Miss Evelyn Carter, he said, flipping to another page. She's the principal at Lincoln Elementary. That's in your district, ma'am. She's been trying to fix broken heaters and shattered windows for years. 3 years ago, she applied for federal funding. Her application got pushed aside, so that same money could go to a nonprofit with connections to your campaign office. They hosted a job fair, one in 2 years. He let that settle before continuing. You ever teach a child who's shivering from cold in December? He asked. You ever stand in a classroom where ceiling tiles fall like autumn leaves? Where kids share textbooks older than their parents? Miss Carter has. And she's still waiting. A sharp inhale cut through the room. A teacher from Lincoln sat in the third row, nodding slowly, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't need to dot. Kennedy shifted the page again. Then there's Reverend Thomas Green, he said. He runs a church in Compton. He's been trying to build a youth center for 4 years. Sent 10 requests to your office, got 0 replies. Meanwhile, a consulting firm linked to your cousin received a community grant to study youth engagement. They held 1 seminar. That was it, but they got paid. A man in the gallery rose to his feet. That's my pastor, he said loudly, his voice unsteady. The chairman lifted his hand, asking for order, but Kennedy didn't flinch. He turned to face the man, gave a small nod, then looked back at Waters. Ma'am, Reverend Green isn't asking for a palace. He's asking for a roof over some kids' heads. For a safe place to keep them off the streets. You ignored him, but I won't. Waters's face was pale now. Her voice finally emerged, trembling. This is a smear campaign, she said, her tone fighting to sound strong but faltering. You're using cherry-picked stories to score points. Kennedy shook his head. His voice was soft, measured. This isn't about scoring anything, he replied. It's about people, real people. And while we sit in here and argue, they're still waiting, still hoping, still hurting. The room fell quiet again. The kind of quiet that didn't ask for silence, it demanded it. Then the chamber doors opened. A woman entered, escorted by a congressional aide. She looked tired, older than her years, but there was strength in her eyes. Kennedy turned toward her and addressed the chairman. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to yield a few minutes to a former staffer from Congresswoman Waters' office. Her name is Lorraine Hayes. The room shifted. Whispers darted. Between lawmakers, Waters' expression turned to alarm, but she said nothing. Lorraine approached the microphone with shaking hands. She glanced at Waters, then began to speak. I worked in Representative Waters' office for 3 years. She said, I joined because I believed in the mission. But what I found was something else. We ignored calls, we ignored letters, we prioritized donors over people. I brought this up internally, and I was told, that's politics. Gasps spread. Even the aides behind Waters looked away, avoiding her gaze. I left, Lorraine continued, because I couldn't keep pretending we were doing the work when we weren't. We stopped listening. And the people noticed. They always notice. Waters opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Kennedy turned to her again. This is Ms. Hayes' truth, but she's not alone. I have 3 other statements signed, verified from other staffers who said the same. He raised a small folder. You can call this slander. You can call it lies. But you can't call it silence anymore. The people are talking, and today, finally, they're being heard. Outside the hearing room, clips of Lorraine's testimony exploded online. Thousands watched live. Many for the first time, and the message was spreading like wildfire. Back in South LA, in community centers, schools, and churches, people gathered around screens on laptops, projectors, even phones held up in shaky hands. And when Lorraine spoke, heads nodded, eyes filled, voices whispered, that's what happened. To me too. And for the first time in a long time, someone was listening. By the time the hearing adjourned that evening, the world outside had already changed. The clips of Lorraine Hayes' quiet, unwavering testimony were airing on every major news network. Hashtags surged. Editorials launched. Constituents in South Los Angeles began calling offices not with demands, but with thank yous. They felt seen, heard, vindicated. It wasn't just about Lorraine or Evelyn Carter or Reverend Green. It was about decades of being overlooked. And finally, someone had cracked open the doors of accountability. Senator Kennedy stood in the marble corridor just outside the chamber, speaking softly into his phone. Yes, he said, make sure the documents are released to the press. Redact the private information, but leave the names of the contracts and vendors. They need to see this. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The entire city was already listening. Congresswoman Waters exited minutes later, flanked by aides and ignoring the cameras. Her face was pale, her pace brisk. When a reporter asked if she would be stepping down from her committee chair, she didn't answer, but the question hung in the air, long after she disappeared into the elevator. Kennedy turned back toward the entrance of the Senate chamber and gave a small nod to Lorraine Hayes, who stood nervously at the edge of the corridor. "You did good," he told her. She smiled, tight-lipped, a tear slipping quietly down her cheek. "I just said what needed saying." 3 days later, a full audit of Waters' congressional office was announced. Whistleblower protections were invoked. And most importantly, emergency funding was authorized for Lincoln Elementary School, for Reverend Green's Youth Center, and for half a dozen other projects that had sat collecting dust in bureaucracy for far too long. Kennedy didn't celebrate. He didn't hold a press conference. He simply returned to Louisiana, where his staff was already preparing a bill named after Lorraine Hayes Act, focused on strengthening accountability protocols for all congressional offices. "You want to fix the machine?" he had told his chief of staff. "You don't just oil the gears, you rebuild the engine." Meanwhile, the political fallout was sweeping. The House Ethics Committee opened an investigation. Several aides resigned. News segments began revisiting past complaints that had once been dismissed as hearsay. And yet, amidst the chaos, something remarkable happened. A groundswell of community leaders from Waters' own district began stepping forward not to denounce her, but to step into the vacuum of leadership. School principals, faith leaders, teachers, parents, people who had never dreamed of running for office were now forming alliances, writing platforms, registering voters. The narrative was no longer about one person's fall, it was about a neighborhood's rise. In a town hall in Compton, Lorraine stood beside the very pastor whose calls she had once ignored, holding a microphone and facing a packed room. "I was part of the problem," she said, "but now I want to be part of the solution." The room erupted in applause. Reverend Green stepped forward, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said, "That's what redemption looks like." Back in Washington, Kennedy sat at his desk, reading the final draft of the Hayes Act. He circled 2 words, mandatory audits. He knew it would face opposition, but he also knew something else. This moment had momentum. Real change wasn't abstract anymore. It was tangible, earned, and inevitable. That night, he received a letter, handwritten, from a child, a girl named Tasha, age 10, from Lincoln Elementary. It read, "Dear Mr. Kennedy, thank you for helping my school. We don't have to wear coats in class anymore. I want to be a senator like you someday. Please don't stop helping people." Kennedy folded the letter slowly, placed it inside his notebook, and closed it with care. For all the noise, the press, the headlines, it was that letter that reminded him why he started this battle in the first place. Weeks passed, then months. The reforms began to take shape. Transparency dashboards were launched. Congressional districts received streamlined channels for constituent services. And the Office of Legislative Ethics reported a 400% increase in misconduct reports because now, people believed their voices mattered. Congresswoman Maxine Waters eventually announced she would not seek re-election. Her statement cited health reasons, but the public knew better. Her silence in the weeks following the hearing said more than her resignation ever could. She left without fanfare. No farewell tour, no final speeches, just a closing line in her press release. "I gave what I could. It's time for others to lead." And they did. At the next education funding hearing, Evelyn Carter testified. Not as a victim, but as a changemaker. "Our schools don't need saviors," she said. "They need systems that serve." Across the aisle, Kennedy smiled. Lorraine Hayes later joined the Office of Congressional Accountability. She trained new staffers on ethics, transparency, and the responsibility of public service. One of her slides simply read, "People remember how you made them feel. Make them feel respected." In time, the Hayes Act passed. Narrowly, but it passed. Years later, Kennedy would speak at a commencement ceremony for a new class of public servants. As he stood at the podium, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a letter. "The one from Tasha. She's in college now," he told the graduates. "She's studying law. She wants to change the world. And you know what? She already is, because someone believed in her school. Someone believed in her community. And someone finally told the truth even when it hurt." He paused. "If you remember one thing from this speech, let it be this. Never forget who you work for. The people aren't beneath you. They are beside you. And every decision you make, every single one, either brings them closer to justice or further from it." The crowd rose in applause. And far from the Capitol, in a quiet neighborhood in South Los Angeles, a small community center opened its doors. Kids rushed inside. Books were stacked on shelves. Desks were clean. Windows intact. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was happening. Change had arrived, not with a roar, but with a ripple, all because someone finally stood up and said, "Enough."